What's up, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Gut Check Radio. And if you're listening to this episode on the day close after it's released, it is beginning of January. It's 2024. Welcome to the new year. And I know lots of us are probably engaging in periods of reflection, periods of deciding what we want 2024 to look like, what's the word of the year, what things we want to look out for, what New Year's resolutions or goals. And there's so many things out there on do New Year's resolutions or do not do and just start them immediately. Whichever moment you feel best captures what you think you need at this time, I would encourage you to go for that. But nonetheless, welcome into 2024. And I'm recording this on New Year's Day, which means the Alabama Crimson Tide are playing today in the Final Four. Cheers and hopes for them that they pursue another national title. For those of you who weren't aware, I'm an annoyingly rampant Alabama fan. So there you go. So in today's episode, we had the pleasure of interviewing a woman named Brea Katrin. And this was one of the more enlightening, both spiritually and physically enlightening conversations that I've had the opportunity to have with somebody. Brea is very well known in the chronic illness, chronic healing space in terms of neuroplasticity-based training, applying neuroplasticity-based training with faith-based practices. And, for those of you wondering, what in the world is the word neuroplasticity mean? Well, if you just take it, it's sort of this idea that the brain can change itself, that through deliberate practice of exercises, of words, of affirmations, of learning new skills, your brain can literally recreate pathways that previously weren't in existence. And 100 years ago, this concept was incredibly foreign. Most neuroanatomists or neuroenthusiasts would have looked at you like you're crazy. But now we're very aware of the power changing your brain can have on your physical, mental, and emotional well-being, spiritual well-being. So that's what we really dive into in this episode. Is Brea's expertise is in both can help coach people one-on-one, going through brain retraining to break free of chronic illness, chronic disease, of restrictive diets, of being reliant on so many supplements and doctors, and combining that neuroplasticity-based training with faith and scripture-based modalities. I absolutely love this combination, and I'm going through my own brain retraining course now to deal with my own deep-seated its, as they like to call it in the brain retraining program, which I really love. Reducing, detaching from the identity of particular symptoms and just labeling them as its. So we get into her story. I mean, she has an absolutely fascinating story of having chronic illness so bad she had to move to the desert, completely on the other side of the country, away from her family, in order to find God and to find healing and to find Jesus. And her story is very triumphant. And it wasn't a complete linear line, as we'll get into. It very much was that very sinusoidal stock market like trend that I always like to tell my clients about. And this is just a very powerful and uplifting story for you out there listening. If you're dealing with chronic illness or been to so many physicians, tried so many diets, supplements, cleanses, detoxes, medications, surgeries, and none of it's helped, brain retraining, neuroplasticity, brain retraining is something you should for sure consider. And we will link to all of Brea's information in the show notes. And she has a class coming up called the Abundant Life class to help people really combine scripture and brain retraining to help really create that mindset of abundance. And we can break free from a lot of the fear and restriction and dogma that so many of us dealing with chronic its and chronic symptoms go through. And without further ado, let's get into my interview with Brea. Welcome to Gut Check Radio, the holistic health podcast where we explore the uniqueness of the human experience to help you navigate your health journey. I'm Nick Belden, a chiropractic physician and functional medicine practitioner. And you all know what's coming next, but the information provided in this podcast is for educational entertainment purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, cure, or treat any disease, and do not apply any of the information here without first speaking with your physician. Since the bulk of this podcast is health, but also storytelling, why don't you give a few of the listeners right now who are probably wondering, oh my gosh, what happened? Like the 30,000 foot view background on what led you to being this statewide nomad.
The background to being a statewide nomad. I will say it started actually with my gut and my pain in my college. And from there, it grew into more issues with nervous system, insomnia and all this stuff. Eventually, I was diagnosed with my ME or CFS, chronic fatigue syndrome. I had fibromyalgia, I had Addison's disease, I had Hashimoto's. And so this is like years I'm like covering right now. I'm like,
Yep.
And it was finally once my first child having him, so I have 3 kids. My first child, I got pregnant with him with my husband. We got pregnant accidentally, actually, when we were in Venezuela. And I had seen a little bit of healing when we were down there. I was really sick going down. But then for some reason, that made me think that I started to get a little bit better. And it made me think like, oh, this is hormonal. So then as I seemed to kind of pop out of some of my issues for a few years, had another child, was at Yale. And then my health started to go down again. And then I was in my mind going, I'm trying everything, changing my diet, doing all the things, and nothing's happening. I have the diagnoses already. And I was like, well, maybe I just need to get pregnant because maybe that'll help me. But I could not take care of another child, but I couldn't get pregnant. And then I was at a fertility clinic, and anyway, all the other things that started happening. But I did eventually actually get pregnant. And believe it or not, it wasn't their drugs, because that just made me get worse. It was, I went off of all of that and I stopped seeing them for a bit, and I did the AIP diet. And do you know the AIP diet?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I did that one, and then that actually helped a little bit, and enough. I just got pregnant, and then I was like, okay, yes, but unfortunately didn't do what it did the time before that, and I was in a deeper rut, and it was pretty bad. And then when I had her, it was 2015. That labor, like boom, like took my body out in a way that was like, whoa. And then my body really, really spiraled. And 2 months after that, we had water damage in our home. And it was a big farmhouse. And I didn't really understand at the time any connection with that, except that we then had the walls opened up once we realized. I won't go into all the journey with that, but it was a pretty big mess in our farmhouse basement. And all of a sudden my body went into like complete and utter just like vomiting and all this stuff in the middle of like the renovations. And it was like, but then I just stayed in the house because I didn't know. So it wasn't for another, I don't know how long, that I working with a functional neurologist, that we were like navigating this together. And he was like listening to me, and he's like, hey, I can tell you're very sick, but I don't know how to help you. And he was like, well, maybe you should try moving out of your house. And that's when I decided to move out of my house and try my mom's. And the story goes on from there, from avoidance to more avoidance, to seeing mold doctors, to seeing this doctor, da, 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 da. Eventually it was like, all of that was pushing me into more and more avoidance. And it was like, you got to do this. Your immune system will calm down. If you go out into the desert, spend enough time away from everything, your immune system will calm down. It's overactive. So I was like, all right, that makes a lot of sense. I've got this mold gene that's turned on, and I can't detox anything, and that's the root behind all my problems. And so I go out to that desert, and I did see improvement. I absolutely saw improvement. And then like I said, it was multiple times I was in the desert. The last time I was there was an extremely long, horrible, tormentous journey. That's when I actually met Jesus in the desert. So, yeah. But then at the same time, I started learning about brain retraining and neuroplasticity. And I was like, holy smokes. Like, I feel like I'm starting to read the Bible, and I'm learning about neuroplasticity. And I'm like, this is like, Jesus is saying these things. And at that point, I started to connect the dots. And now I can tell it was the Holy Spirit doing it. But like starting to see, oh, this has all been stress. This hasn't been this or this or this. It's like a physiological trigger, like mold. That's just another stressor. And it was like the straw that broke the camel's back. And it was all these different layers of different variables of stress. So when I started to see everything through this lens of stress, that then it started me to really understand, okay, like I actually can heal. I just need my system to come back into rest and digest, into that parasympathetic. And it's stuck in all this chronic fight or flight and freeze. And that was a journey. Just because I knew that didn't mean it happened automatically. It was not easy, but yeah, that's when I started all the brain retraining stuff that I got into.
I appreciate you sharing that, because I know to live through some of those moments again. I mean, I know you've done the work on the back end, but I know still sometimes to live through those ups and downs is like, oh boy, you have to like bring yourself to it. And I want to go back and touch through every little part. But the first thing I want to ask you is, did you think in the beginning that you were one diagnosis or one avoidant behavior away from feeling, there it is?
You know, that's such a good question. I probably did. I probably was like, I just need to know, and then I can do what I need to do, and then this will be over. And it was, yeah, I'm sure I very much had this like, Well, one, I never gave up. That was one thing about me. Like there was one moment that I felt like I was about to give up. My husband was like, just don't give up. That's enough for me. But yeah, the persistent pursuit of that certainly kept me going, but it was never one thing that was going to fix me. Yeah.
And what do you think? So you mentioned things your husband would say. What else do you think in those depths gave you the most hope? Like when you woke up, you're like, okay, like this is what I'm thinking will happen today to help me move forward.
Before Jesus, or
yeah, we'll go BJ before Jesus. Yeah, yeah.
Honestly, it was science. Like I was such a
Mm.
scientist. I studied science at Princeton and Yale. And so for me, I was like, I never understood why there people are telling me something like, you just need to take this drug the rest of your life. You have Addison's disease. I was like, this makes no sense to me. Why is my body attacking itself? So I was always looking for the scientific understanding and reason behind. So that always was my hope. But I think once I got to the mold avoidance world, and you're really out of left field at that point, because there's not a lot of foundation behind the science that they're bringing up. There's a lot of correlation they're making, or sorry, causation that they're applying to correlation. There's not a lot of strong science out there. But that because I had so put my trust in science was my only way to go. And so I was kept being led down, well, I just don't think that other people understand this yet. And so they're just finding something new. And I was chasing that next thing that alternative health was bringing in.
The shiny thing. Yeah.
The shiny thing.
Yeah. And for a little bit of background for listeners who maybe aren't familiar, in the mold community, there's such an emphasis on avoidance, and you can never come near it, or else the mycotoxins, I don't even like that word, are going to completely obliterate you. And what I started, as I started working with people who would go through that journey, I started just thinking in my own head, like, to me, we were made to be resilient, and avoidance never really made sense. But I would, like you said, the science was pointing to avoidance. So I was like, I guess that's what you do. So at what point did you start to realize, like, it's not about avoidance, but it's about resiliency?
Sure. Well, I think the brain retraining that I did, I learned a lot about limbic system resistance. And so I learned about these, and through the brain, learning about these like well-worn toboggan runs that we have in our brains for the things that we use the most. It's a pathway of least resistance. And if you think about it in terms of humans in general, we do a lot of avoiding. We avoid suffering. We avoid conflict. We avoid a lot. And we do that, it actually becomes just a pattern in our behavior. So the more that I saw and understood that, I was like, my breakthrough in this journey comes from facing what I'm resisting, facing where the block is, where the wall is. And obviously with me and my faith in God and Jesus and my relationship with him, that was like, okay, his love. I understood through the understanding of the science of neuroplasticity that I was like, all these neurochemicals, all these neurochemistry or chemicals that are coming up, the dose chemistry, like the good stuff that comes from love. And all this other stuff comes from fear. And I was like, I see this as a fear block, that even if I don't necessarily think I feel fear, that whatever I am resisting, there's something good on the other side of that God has for me. And I need to face it and I need to walk through it. And if I avoid it, I'm just going to be kind of circling around, and I'm not going to move through this, and I'm not going to move up and through. So I started to see overall the human behavior element of all of us, and the tendency to go the pathway of least resistance for all of us, and realizing that I have to change my brain. In order to change my brain, I have to build new pathways. In order to build new pathways, I need to actually do things that I am not used to doing, and I'm not comfortable even with doing. And through that, those neural connections are going to get strengthened, and then my brain is this control center for optimal health. And as I do that, I build a new brain, and I don't use the old pathways that are the ones that have been well worn, especially avoidance type ones. They die. Like that's just the reality of how our brains are made. And as I saw that helped me to be like, oh, I see this in a whole new light. I got to observe myself curiously. I got to watch how I'm behaving, not from fear, but from that curious place of like why I'm doing what I'm doing, and recognize the motivation behind it. Does that help?
It does. No, oh my goodness. Yeah. And, for the listeners who aren't familiar with like limbic retraining, the limbic system, give us like the brief overview, and then what finally led you to stumble on the brain retraining? Like who introduced you, how, in what situation?
Sure.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So first of all, the limbic system, a lot of people don't even know what the limbic system is, right? Yeah. So the limbic system is this part of your brain that is in your is it your temporal lobe, and we call it a lot of times your primitive brain. It can also be called your emotional chemical brain. So anytime any of us, regardless whether you're healthy or not healthy, your every emotion that you have is a chemical secreted through your limbic system. And that limbic system is this alert system for you that mostly deals a lot to do with protective, alerting problems. That's where your fear centers are, your amygdala. You've got a short-term memory, your hippocampus. You've got your hypothalamus. That's your that's connected to your HPA axis, and it's that thermostat in the body. And then you've got a few other things like your cingulate gyrus, which is there putting that gate up, yes or no, do we have an invader coming into our body or not? And so that understanding that sits on your autonomic nervous system, which is our automatic nervous system, which just causes the things to happen in our body automatically, breathe and, our heart rate and everything, and seeing the connection with the signaling that is coming from my limbic system is directly creating functionality or dysfunctionality in my automatic nervous system. And so there's that part of your brain, but we have something called our prefrontal cortex that goes on top that helps us to make those higher decisions so that we don't just live out of this emotional chemical brain and just do whatever a 3-year-old would do in a situation and have a temper tantrum. We go, hold on a second, and we're able to reason and deduce. But when you get into chronic fight or flight, when your brain starts to really go through a lot of these inflammatory processes, that part of your brain, it actually starts to shrink. And you don't function so well in your prefrontal cortex. So that's when your limbic system really starts driving the bus. And it's making a lot of the decisions for you. And you don't want to make those decisions, but it's actually doing it for you. You almost feel like you're in bondage to whatever is coming up. Like somebody with anxiety, they don't want to fear something. They don't want to feel a certain way, but their body is exuding this sensation, these feelings, and these emotions. And they feel out of control and powerless to it. So that limbic system needs to know that you're safe and needs to know that you are okay. And we need to tell it that and signal it that, because it's now just operating based upon old information from the past, and it's constantly living in these loops, these trauma loops, and signaling that. So we need to re-signal the right things to let your brain, your body, all of you know that you're fine, you're going to be okay, and that you're going to come out of this, regardless of whether or not you actually have a real diagnosis or not, that you can come out of it. So someone with COVID gets COVID, that's a real thing. But we don't have to sit in long COVID. We can actually train the brain to come out of that so that your body can actually come and get into rest and digest and heal. And that's a lot of what you're doing in limbic system retraining.
Yeah. And like you said, ironically, for a lot of people, the avoidant behavior that they think they need is actually amplifying the neural circuitry of the limbic system.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah. Especially when emotions are involved, because emotions strengthen neural connections. So as soon as you have fear or guilt or shame or all the negative things that are in there, and there's strong emotions associated with it, it actually strengthens those pathways. And so we have these, like I said, these well-worn toboggan runs, or maybe they're not quite there yet, but the more that we avoid, or the more that we operate in these pathways that are not helpful to recovery, that it just makes it like grows deeper, and then it becomes easier to default into that automatically. And we need to signal out of this. And yeah, it's amazing the principles of neuroplasticity that can get us through some of the injuries that come about in our lives, whether it's virus, whether it's car accident, whatever it is that that can get us, kind of push us into this state and start to create this cycle. We can use the same principles to get us out of that and back into rest and digest, and signal back to our bodies and our brains that all is well, all will be well, and then our body can actually do what it needs to do, which is to come back into that harmony and that state where your gut flora can come back into like that symphony, like all these wonderful things that our bodies want to do, know how to do, but that we have this broken messaging system that's going on that's keeping you stuck in that state of, oh no, bad things, survival mode.
Yeah. And how did you first become introduced to it?
So I originally got introduced by a doctor in New York, but I poo-pooed it because I took it to my amazing functional neurologist. I will never say anything negative about that man, because he has helped me so much, but he didn't know anything about it. Despite the fact that he does all neuroplasticity, does all the traumatic brain injury retraining that he does with all these people, helped me so much. He said to me, and hope it's okay, I won't even give his name, but that he said that your limbic system, you can't retrain your limbic system, is what he said to me.
And he believed
Yeah,
in neuroplasticity.
he believed in neuroplasticity,
Yeah.
but he felt like that was this one part of your brain you could not access.
Interesting.
And which was really interesting. So when I healed and I was able to tell him my story, he was like, and now he's starting to see it in his own practice. He's even sent people to me because he's like, I don't know how to do what you do, because it's a very different type of neuroplasticity that he works on. But yeah, so he was the one that told me, oh yeah, so he said to me, this makes it sound like these symptoms are in your head, and we know that they're real. So I was like, oh, okay, that's just saying that I have a psychosomatic illness, and I'm not gonna do that. So I put it aside. And then I went deeper into my avoidance journey and all the things that I did. And it wasn't until I was back in the desert the last time that and out there that it came up in my social media group, my illness group. And they were talking about it specifically. Someone was giving a testimony of how it was working for chemical sensitivity, but everyone was saying, no, but this doesn't work for mold. And I bought into it right away, going like, well, why wouldn't it? And I felt like right away God was showing me like the memories of, see, remember when this happened? Remember, I was like, oh. And I started to put the pieces together, and I was like, all right, we're doing this. And then I got the program. I literally had the DVDs back then, and I had a minivan that I had, and I had a little portable player on there, and I was watching it, and I was doing the program out in the desert.
That's beautiful. So was they a chiropractic neurologist? Was he a chiropractor by training?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I'm actually a chiropractor as well and took some training in functional neurology. Fascinating world. And that, to me, that's funny because I feel like that and limbic retraining blend together like with so much harmony. I'm like, so it was sort of his analysis that made you poo-poo it and then
Yeah.
made you sort of put it on the back burner. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And so then when you come to it to redo it, was it sort of, because you're thinking, oh, they're going to say it's all in my head. And then when you start it, were you instantly like, oh no, like there's legitimacy here. How long did it take you, do you feel like, to become bought in?
Well, when I first started, I immediately, because for me, again, because I was coming to read the Bible and I was like, Jesus is saying these things, I was actually putting way more stake in it, because I was like, had come to this place where I had never believed in God before, and now I was being revealed that God's real, and I had basically denied his existence most of my life. And now I was like, well, then what else did I get wrong? And so then when I came to read the words of Jesus, I was like, no, Jesus is saying like these exact same things. And so that's when I put a lot of stake into what was being said in the science of neuroplasticity. And I started it immediately, but I didn't do it well. I didn't do it properly. I didn't know what I was doing. And then I went really, really big, and I tried to go places I should not have gone, and I tried to eat a bite of a piece of pizza. Like I just was like, let's do this. It's all, I can do all these things. I was believing, when your eyes are bigger than your stomach. I just wasn't there yet. I didn't understand the power of the limbic system. I didn't understand the power of the memory. I didn't understand the power of any of that in the brain and the pathways. And so it took me out really, really badly, actually. So it was later, but then I knew still, I was like, no, this is still my answer. Like the avoidance is not my answer, even though I had to go back into a lot of the avoidance stuff. But at that point, it wasn't really helping me all that much. It was like, I might as well just face the music, and I can't be out here alone. And my mom, I can't have her leave me because I'm going to kill myself if she leaves me. So I got on a plane with her, and I faced the music, and I went home, and I was very, very, very ill. But thank you to God that I just kept going with it. At that point, there was no stopping me. I said, I know I've come out of this before. I will come out of it again. And I know the tools that I have now, and I have God with me. And I know that I'm going to come out of this regardless of what I feel like is going to happen. So I very much was like, I'm all in at that point. I had enough evidence in my own journey and enough understanding now of the brain to understand that my brain is misfiring, and there's a wrong message being sent, and it needs to be reconditioned. Yeah.
So do you think the reason you were still having reactions when you realized that this is awesome, and part of as someone who's going through the brain retraining program now, part of what you're doing is almost like phobia therapy, where you introduce yourself either mentally or physically to the thing you previously used to avoid. Do you think you hadn't done the brain retraining enough to expose yourself to that level? Was it just that simple?
I don't know if it's that simple. It
Yeah.
certainly is on one level that simple, in terms of, I didn't have like it's real. It's that stuff is really real, and it comes out and it's very powerful. And when this journey of going through brain training is such a learning journey. Like this is why I can't imagine anyone ever actually trying to teach other people to do this without actually doing it themselves, because it's kind of like going through your own military training where you're learning actually what it's like to be around the minefields, and you're learning step by step by step. So yeah, I didn't know enough. I just didn't. You got to you get experience under your feet as you do it to know, and the new pathways and the confidence and the tools, and you grow in that so that you can take on bigger things. And the bigger things obviously don't feel as big once you've seen enough healing, but it's a great journey. It's rewarding. It's amazing. You see sometimes healing start to manifest. I shouldn't say that word, but like start to come to pass like immediately. But there can often be this kind of up and down journey that you're on for sure. So yeah, I just didn't have it under my belt yet. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And you said something earlier that reminded me of that, how we all want to avoid suffering, when, as any Christian or any believer realizes, like, the Bible almost promises suffering.
Right.
And so it's not necessarily the absence, it's the relationship and the patience and such. So when you even said that you flew home and you said you were super ill, were you sort of, was it hard to hold on to hope at that point going through that journey? Or were you like, no, like, God, like Jesus, they've still got me through this. I'm still okay.
Oh gosh. It's funny. I was just talking to someone the other day. They're like, I saw something on YouTube that you put, and it really, really helped me, because I talked about how I could have a moment of like so much hope and like, yes, we've got this. God's got me. Hooray. We've got the victory. And then slam. I'm like an hour later, I'm a goner. And I mean a goner in terms of I am grasping at anything that can bring me hope, anything that can bring me to a place out of whatever I'm experiencing. So it was like, whoa, like this. So no, I didn't, there's no way. I had to walk through a lot of just like, I don't know how to say it other way than attacks of like hopelessness and waves of things that were trying to come at me. So no, I did not have, but through having come to know God, like Jesus, like I had such like he loves me, like God's with me. Like I did, but I couldn't always connect with that on like a heart level in the moments. And that's where I was learning my tools of all how to do this. And I can't explain that all right now, but I would come out of it eventually.
So it was almost the hope of the higher possibility.
Yeah, I don't know if
Yeah.
it was so much feeling hope in the moment.
Yeah.
Though.
Yeah.
Kind
Yeah.
of more like I give this over. I don't know what to do. I'm gonna do what I know to do. And I have to be just like guarding my heart and take one step forward in just essentially trust and patience with like, I believe that this is still gonna work, regardless of
Yes.
what I'm doing right now.
So almost, maybe I should reword it. Almost not giving up hope altogether, but giving up control, and
Yes,
giving up control to
100%.
something
Yes,
higher.
yes, yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Giving up
Yeah.
control is gigantic. That surrender of like, because especially nobody wants to go through a healing journey that sucks. Like where you're
Right.
like, I went into this hoping that I was like, I'm gonna get this done in 2 months. I'm gonna bang it out. I'm just gonna be out of this. And then you're in it, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, I don't know. This isn't cool. And so I often have to coach people through this, because it's like, I don't want to keep going through this journey. That's generally what people are saying, right? I don't want to keep going through this journey. Like I want out. And so yes, constantly that tension of like believing that you're going to get out of it like tomorrow or today or whatever it is, with also that patience of like, okay, no matter what it is, I know that I'm going to be okay. I know that I'm going to get, I'm going to get my freedom. I'm going to get restoration. I'm going to get redemption. I'm going to get all these good things, and it's going to be good. And then in the end, when you finally come out of it, you can come to this place of like, I'm actually thankful I went through that, which is like the weirdest thing, because I never thought I would say those words. I never, ever. I was like, I will never be one of those people. No, this is horrible. I hate sickness. This is horrendous. And that's true. But at the same time, coming out, you can go, oh, I can see now all the things that like have changed in me and changed in my life, my values, my priorities, my character, like everything. I would not be the person that I am today had I not gone through that.
It's like that was God's will for you to experience those very.
No, if it was so much
Yeah.
God, much as he used it
Mm.
for for the crap that the enemy brought, he did the whole, like, whatever the enemy meant for evil, I will use for good. And he was able to take lemons and turn it into lemonade. I can never believe that God willed for me to suffer like that. I think in the sense that he gave us free will and crap happens in this world. And so there's a casualty of that, but that he's like, hey, I offer you this amazing gift of redemption and freedom and wholeness and health. And I'm going to bring you through this. And yeah, so now I can see, obviously, I'm able to go around and help other people. I mean, I couldn't have helped other people if this.
And with working with people going through similar journeys to you, what do you think is why do you, this may seem like a silly question, but why do you feel like they want to give up? Like, why do you feel like they struggle to, or they're like, I can't do this?
Right. Gosh, there's so many reasons. Lord help me. I mean, the reality is it's hard. I mean, I think anybody that goes through these horrendous sick journeys, it's a lot of trauma. Like, I don't blame people, basically, is what I'm saying, for wanting to give up. Like, some of the stories that I've heard, the things that people have gone through, to persist through that and to believe in change still. I mean, there's a lot going against them to believe in that. So I never ever want to ever judge anybody for feeling that way. Like, 100%. It's a real thing that they're gonna feel. And I know that I wanted to many times, and just like, can I just have an out? So I think there's, first and foremost, is the level of symptomology, the noise, if you will, of how bad it actually is on an experiential level. And then not seeing a way out. Like, it's so challenging when you just feel so blocked in all ways and not being able to have that vision. If somebody has a vision to see beyond what they're in, I mean, that's from hope, right? And seeing that then they can actually say, I'm going to keep pressing in and I'm going to keep going. But when somebody's just completely shut off from that, I mean, that's a dark place. And I mean, I get it, and if they feel like every single time they put themselves on that table of like, okay, I'm going to try again, and they just feel like there's nothing that's come of it. That's a repeated pattern that starts to build a story and a narrative in them that says, I'm never getting out of this. But that's why I'm like, I don't know how anyone does this without God, because he always promises no matter what you go through, that he's like, I will bring you out of this. And he is that living hope that can provide that hope for us to continue to press in and believe. So I think fear, the answer for you, is ultimately some version of fear that comes to steal, kill, and destroy, and create a tainted vision or imagination based upon what the person is physically experiencing and has gone through, and the memories that have gotten looped in there. That's my answer.
And I know you work mostly with people going through chronic healing conditions that are also believers, correct?
Yeah, for the most part, not always.
Yeah, that's what I want to ask about the ones who aren't. And you just said, how could anybody go through this without God?
Right.
Do you, because I'm assuming the people you work with, are they agnostic or mostly atheist, or is it an entire spectrum?
There's a bit of a spectrum. I mean, like Hindu, spiritual people who New Age, we don't line up, let's just say, but they're willing to, like, I meet them where they're at and they meet me where I'm at, I guess. I used to get more just sort of like, I don't want to talk about God, I just want to talk about the science. But and then I get the people who are just kind of curious, like, because a lot of times in this journey, especially with Brea Katrin, they're like, this is like, it kind of opens a door to, when they start to do visualizations and stuff, to be like, whoa, maybe there is a God. So yeah, but mostly at this point, I would say I mostly work with believers.
And on the ones that are non-believers, we'll take the curious ones, because to me, the curious ones, the ones that are open, are the most fascinating. That's where I was 2 years ago. I was like open to anything. And how does that conversation start, where they're like going through the phase, and then you bring up like, hey, it's hard to go through this without God? Like, how do you have like a recent story with one of them where you like first bridge that gap with them and you saw it sort of click?
That is a good question. I have to be very sensitive, because they're paying me to help them. So
Yeah, we'll call it
I'm like,
HIPAA
no,
compliance, of course. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't want to like press anything upon them. So I think the best way for me, I always talk through my own journey, my own experience, and I'll bring up scripture that lines up with whatever we're talking about. And then I just, if they're ever interested, I just say, you know what? Because sometimes people will say to me, your faith is so fascinating. Like they're amazed by my faith. Like,
Mm.
because I know that I'm like, no, you can't get me off of a belief in Jesus Christ. Like you just can't. And so they'll kind of question me a little bit more about that. And then usually I'll just kind of leave it at like, ask God to reveal himself to you. And if you want, like ask Jesus, like talk to Jesus. And if you want to invite him into your heart, like he'll show you, he'll reveal it to you, and he'll reveal himself to you. And so that's generally as far as I'll really go. Unless there's some people that come to me and they're like really already there, but they just need the extra like, and I'm like, hey, let's get into the Bible. And then I'll send them away with some things and they'll come back and it's like, okay, let's go the Jesus way. And I'm like, all right, let's do this. So it's pretty different, I think, depending on the person. I've definitely though had some people that have walked away with that like unwillingness to fully surrender to Jesus being God. And that's hard.
Mm. Mm.
That's, yeah.
Yeah. Does it give you more internal joy and fulfillment when the lights click in terms of their relationship with Jesus or God, or when their relationship clicks with their symptoms?
Oh, definitely with God. Like,
Yeah. Mm.
oh yeah, 100%. When,
Mm.
especially if I get to the question, one of the biggest things I love to kind of tap into is like, do you feel God's love for you? And most of the time I know it up here, but I don't know. I don't really think I feel it. And a lot of times when people are sick, especially, it's hard to feel good emotions. It's hard to feel love. It's hard. Like the nervous system is just like, so when I get there, I'm like, okay, now I get super blessed when I get to lead them into a process of how to actually receive the love of God for them personally in a personal relationship with them. And then it's like when the lights come on, I'm like, okay, Lord, you've got them. Like I know that you've
Mm.
got them. This might not be an overnight journey, but that I know now that they're hooked. They're hooked on the love of Jesus and that he's got them. So that, I mean, I'm very, 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 very excited about that. I am also extremely excited when somebody can finally connect their story and their symptoms and what they've gone to some of the things that even I've talked about here, and just like some of their journey of like, oh, this thing happened to me at this age, or then this started to happen, and they start to see the mind body connection and the life history connection with their actual symptoms and patterns of behaviors. And it's not their fault, and it's not a personality flaw. It's not about them, but it's actually like, oh, I see my story differently. And then they can start to connect more with that than with the identification of maybe like a diagnosis or that. And that's awesome.
Yeah. And actually, I want to put a brief pin in the diagnosis part because that's something I want to ask about. But something you said on a prior podcast, you just mentioned that person understood the mind body connection. And most people have heard of the triad of like mind, body, spirit. And then some people will say spirit and soul interchangeably. But I
Sure.
heard you on your own YouTube channel differentiate those two things. So I heard
Yeah.
that and I'm like, I have to ask about that.
Well, the Bible tells us in First Thessalonians, what is it, 5:23, I think, that we're spirit, soul, and body. And then in Hebrews, I think is it 4:12, where it talks about that. I'm like, can I get to these pages in my Bible? Okay, 4:12. For the word of God is living and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even to the division of soul and spirit, and of joints and marrow, and a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. So those are just two examples, though, but where we divide up the spirit from the soul. I don't know if it's really all that important in terms of, because I do believe like, oh, we are these eternal souls that go to heaven, but how much is that language versus it's an eternal spirit, but we're just giving it a different word? I don't know. I don't have a clear, but I will say that your spirit, when it's joined to the Lord as one spirit, when you are born again, you have become a new creation in Christ. And that is happening on the core essence level of who you actually are. And then your soul, I've often heard it defined as mind, will, and emotions. I'm not 100% sold on that definition because, like I just talked about with emotions, you can bring that down to a body level because emotions are chemicals that actually flow in your body, or they're even they're vibrational frequencies when you get down an energetic level. So I'm like, I'm not 100% sure on exactly how you define the soul, but I certainly can say that there is a difference between who I actually am inside of me and who is physically being expressed right now in this moment in this world. And when I go beyond this world to be with Jesus, I do get a whole new, well, my body is resurrected. We get a glorified body and all of that. And I understand that. But ultimately, the essence of who we are does not change. Like that spirit, I think will grow forever. I don't mean that. Like we're not fixed, but like you've already been put into the kingdom, joined with the Lord as one spirit. So there's definitely a distinction. There's a lot of teachings on spirit, soul, and body that talk specifically about this, and what we've been given already in the kingdom that is now and the tension with the kingdom that's to come. And so the kingdom that is now talks about everything we already have, and that is the core essence. And I know that in my own journey, this was so important, because when I understood that I enjoyed this Holy Spirit, he is in me from head to toe, that I was like, that means that I possess creativity. That means I possess patience. That means I possess all these things that I was saying, I've never had this in my life. But I was like, but now as a born again believer in Jesus Christ, I do have this. And yes, so that would be the I guess sort of the distinction. The soul is still malleable, changeable, formable here on earth, and we are renewed here in our, in the mind, in the soul level. And that absolutely impacts what the outcome is in our body.
And there's a fascinating book called Molecules of Emotion for people who also want like the scientific, like heavy perspective. Really fascinating. I think she goes through like, have you read that book before, heard of it before? Oh, it's just a woman who goes through a PhD journey. I think she was studying, she might've been the person like to bring oxytocin or one of those hormones like to the forefront. So it was fascinating. Cool. Yeah. And then a couple year and a half ago, when I was still like Bible skeptical, we were at a Q&A by our teaching pastor, who's so fascinating. His name's Mark Moore. I'm gonna give him a shout out. He's brilliant. And someone asked him a question about IVF. And anytime people asked a question about health in the Bible, I was hooked, because that, this is what I'm doing professionally. This is what I thought my identity was. And his response, so personally, essentially this person was asking, like, how do you reconcile that? And his answer, simple and beautiful. He's like, well, God created us to create. And I was like, dang. Because here I am, I was thinking through like these pharmaceutical companies, like this, that, and healthcare medicine, like how can these be like things of God? And then he answered that, and I was like, oh my goodness. And like you just said, like if we are created, if like we can create because he is inside of us, like there is nothing that's necessarily bad or good.
Right.
And
sure.
Yeah. I mean, do you have any like different thoughts or perspective on that?
No, I think you've said something really powerful, and that's that we have ultimately been given dominion here on earth, is actually what the Bible tells us. And we were called by God to like multiply. And he's given us this ability to procreate and to create. And so, yeah, it's always at his, I don't want to say, I don't know, discretion, but at his will, right? Like he is knitting and forming a human's, a soul, a being, a spirit, however you want to see it. And in that IVF, whatever is happening, like he's well aware of the choices that we are making. And he is, and regardless of how a child comes to pass, like God is right there over that child. And it is a beautiful creation of his. Like each one of us is a poem of him. So it doesn't matter really so much how that comes to be. It's still a work of God yeah, 100%. Yes. Yeah. Miracle. I mean, life is a miracle.
Yes. His will was so powerful, and yet he created us. And that's when I remember hearing that, I used to assign morality to food. I was one of those people. And, like gluten, dairy, vegetable oils, added sugar, good, bad. I'm sure when you did AIP or everything else, AIP labels everything that supposedly wasn't around 3,000 years ago was bad. I guess what I'm wondering is like to bridge the gap toward like people receiving a diagnosis. And oftentimes, like when people receive that, it's like this black and white, good and bad thing. And I'm beginning to realize as I go through this brain retraining, how I'm going to make this statement, how unhelpful a diagnosis most of the time really is. And how really, I had a woman on a couple weeks ago, we were talking about cancer, and how a lot of times when someone gets diagnosed with cancer, that being told you have cancer might be more emotionally traumatic on the nervous system than might actually be stressful from the cancer itself.
100%. Yes.
So then I'm wondering, where is there a place for a diagnosis? So like, is there even still a place for that? Because I'm sitting here
Right.
wondering like, man, I don't know.
I'm glad that you think these questions, that I've spent so much time like contemplating all of these things. And I know that when I was healing, I'll get back to the cancer thing in a second, but like when I was healing, I mean, my body was doing some crazy things in the middle of healing. And I was like, do I have MS? Like, it's like automatically all these things start coming up. And I at that point knew enough to be like, as it was happening, to be like, it does not matter whether or not somebody labels me with that diagnosis and I say have some autoimmune condition and it's labeled MS. At the end of the day, I know that I'm on the right path, and that as my body is in rest and digest, whatever disease, manifestation of dis-ease, disorder will be rectified, will be healed. So I really brought down the value of all of those labels. And you're right. I think one of the things that I felt like, because someone who came from being an atheist and I am still a scientist, but like very strongly only trusting in man and science, and came out of that, I had to face this sort of like, okay, Jesus is the word in the flesh and made flesh, and this is a word world. And I've got a lot of words out there in science, and it's a lot of, yes, there's a lot of data, but there's a lot of theory, and there's a lot of interpretation, there's a lot of statistics that go wrong, there's a lot of pride involved in science. I started to really break down the human element as a part of science itself and medicine itself. And it really helped me to say, at the end of the day, I have to choose somebody's word on this, because I didn't do repeated trials for 50 years to see whether or not this or that is like, anyway, whatever, different scientific things. I'm not downplaying science. What it did was it helped me elevate God's word and his reality versus what the paradigm is in the scientific world, and their understanding and the view, the way through which they're seeing it. So I started to see that I was like, oh, they have their own limited lens in terms of how they are looking at the body, and they're looking at it through a lens, and then they pass that on to their own children in science, like, the doctor passed whatever to their students, and that keeps getting passed on. And then there's a lot of stuff that gets accumulated along the way that's just like someone else figured this out, and so we're just following this sort of system of thinking, and we're adding to this system and thinking. And I was like, well, that's a lot of people taking information from other people, and then they're trying to like use that limited understanding. And I was like, okay, God, well, let's tear this all down. And let's now just decide that, what if I can now, if I can question somebody's science somehow in some way, then I'm going to give that to you. And I'm going to say, you tell me what the truth is. And through that, it really helped me to be able to really see even like cancer or any of these other diagnoses through a lens of stress, through a lens, especially to do with chronic fight or flight in the nervous system and the things that are happening. And then it brought it back to the heart, because stress has to be, well, I guess there's physiological stress that doesn't impact the heart, but then you get fear involved as well. So when I saw it that way, then it was like, I started to just see in a whole new plane, I guess. And that's where I've lived. That's actually where I stay. And it's actually how I guard my heart from people coming to me with some really bad diagnoses that I could easily be like, ooh, that is really bad. And I'm like, no, but I see it. I see it through a different lens. And I always bring that back. So yes, I very much have looked at it differently ever since. And one more thing I want to say is the Western way of thinking versus the Eastern world way of thinking is different. And that also helped me to be like, I have a grid that I can't think like an Eastern person thinks, because I wasn't raised that way. I didn't grow up in their culture. I'd have to retrain my brain to think the way that an Eastern person thinks, which is much more holistically, not so much in systems, right? We learn a lot in systems. And so we process things through this grid of system thinking that they don't do in the Eastern world. And I was like, well, which one's right? And I was like, I don't think anything's right. It's just the way that they've learned versus what we've learned. And that also helped me to be like, okay, it just added all these layers again of like, people are just humans and they're doing the best that they can, but ultimately they do not own the truth. And so I get to choose whether or not I buy into what they're telling me or not. And it went back to, this is a word-based world, and I get to choose whose words I'm going to believe. And that helped me a lot to guard my heart.
That's beautiful. This is a words-based world, and I get to choose the words.
Yeah.
That's like sticker value right there.
Amen.
Yeah. Amen. And so now that you have that newfound understanding, how do you treat your own health practices? Like, do you still get blood work regularly? Do you still like geek out over the numbers of your fasting glucose or like your liver enzymes, or do you just like, you know what, like those don't, like, how do you sort of, or like nutritional practices, like what's your relationship with that like now?
Sure. I have yet to see a doctor since I was sick. So
Good.
I'm not, that's necessarily a good thing. I'm like, I don't need to go. I don't feel a sense of going. I'm not against doctors. So I never want anyone to think that I'm against doctors. And I also never want anyone to think who's wanting to believe God for their healing that it's wrong to go see a doctor. Like, I'm not against doctors. I think that there's a value and a place. I personally have never felt the need to go to a doctor. I have seen like a chiropractor for like a sports injury to help out with some of that, as I was like, okay, yeah, I can see that I could use some help with that. What else have I done? And then my health, my eating is, it took a while. So my healing journey was very much like most people who go through a chronic illness journey. You get pretty strict on your diet and the things that you've learned, and you geek out, like you said, and you learn all this stuff about the foods you can and cannot eat until you get to the point where you've learned so much and you realize I can't eat anything.
Yeah. I'm gonna breathe. I'm gonna respirate for a living. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I was like, there's nothing quote unquote safe. So so it did actually surprise me how long it took me to fully come out of that, because I thought that even though I was like, no, I'm changing every way that I believe and I'm gonna start to eat differently, I noticed this tension constantly of this voice kind of like, are you sure that's okay? Are you sure that you can eat that much sugar? Are you sure you can eat that many carbs? Did you eat enough? I don't know. That was probably too much non-organic food. Like you might have to eat more. Like, honestly, it was constant. And the what happened over time though, is I started to press into those, and every once in a while, mostly out of kind of almost laziness or just convenience level, I'm like, whatever, I'm just not going to eat that way today and I'm fine. I think I'm going to be fine. It's fine. I'll make up for it. And then I wouldn't make up for it, and I was still fine. So it was like kind of almost like just confirming that my own laziness, in a sense, my own sort of lack of discipline. I was able to start eating more regularly, I guess you could call, like a standard American diet. And I was like, and I'm still fine. Like, it's not affecting me. And but I would say, like, I still eat generally probably healthier than the standard American person. I mean, I eat vegetables. I do probably eat a lot of sugar because I'm like, I love chocolate, but I don't, I do tend to like choose non-processed foods over processed foods. Like, I just think that there's wisdom in that, but I'm also okay if I go on vacation and I just eat whatever the heck I want at the buffet, like all the junk on holidays, eat all the junk. And I'm not like, oh no, what's going to happen to me? So I don't know if that gives you a great answer, but it's also with my own kids. I had to like do this with my own kids too. Cause it was like, how much do I let them eat all the junk food that comes to them at church and at school and at birthday parties and over time, I just like really let go of a lot of that. And as long as I know they're eating some vegetables once a day, then, and they're healthy. That's the crazy part, is they're just so healthy. And I'm like, okay, just let that go. Yeah.
I have so many follow-up questions I want to ask that, but I want to be conscious of your time as well, especially on the idea of like children and how to, because I've had, yeah, I'll table that for another day. So Brea, if people want to learn more about you, you know, plug your stuff, pay the bills, let them know where they can find you more on the social media interwebs.
Yeah. So I am, BreaKatrin.com is my website. I am on YouTube. I love posting videos on YouTube. So at Brea Katrin on YouTube, my YouTube channel. I'm on Instagram. I'm on all the usual things, Facebook, Instagram, all that. So be under Brea Katrin or Brea Katrin, I think, wellness coaching. So I'm on there. If you sign up for my newsletter on my website, that you will get invited to, I do testimony meetings every once in a while. And so they find out about that. And then we have people come on and share their testimonies, which are awesome. And then I have a newsletter and all that fun stuff that goes with it. Yeah. And then I do have my own neuroplasticity based program that I teach. And then I also have a group coaching class after that for 12 weeks as well, a group one. And then I do one-to-one coaching with people.
That's beautiful. We'll put all that information in the show notes. And Brea, last question for you here. So this is Gut Check Radio, and it's really all about exploring the gut check moments, that have happened in people's lives, personal, professional health. So what would you say the most recent gut check moment you can think of that you've gone through, and sort of walk us through what it was like in the midst of it?
Hey, I have so many gut check moments. Let's see, Lord, help me with this one, because I think this year for me has been so much about relationship healing and the power of love for healing relationships, and finding more intimacy and deepening of relationships with people. So I guess my gut check was the revelation that I have the conscious choices that I make actually can affect the level of intimacy that I can have with my children, with my best friends, with my parents. And I had to choose to recognize things like I have to face again that resistance that we're talking about, the resistance to vulnerability, the resistance to honestly spending more time focusing on my kids than on maybe on my career, just different things that I had to make that conscious. I'm setting a goal. I want more of this, God. I want more. And ultimately, I can be a light in that by receiving love from you for me, and then outpouring that and acting on that in ways that it causes me to actually trust God more, and to enter in and face a lot of resistance. And through that decision making, so I don't know if it's necessarily one gut check, but like a lot of the decision making along the way, that I have seen so much fruit come in, especially with my children and my parents. And yeah, just learning how to walk in a different way, in putting time and energy into that I didn't think that I had, and not saying I don't have enough, and actually relying on God, and then him showing up in a beautiful way and like filling me even more to have greater capacity. So that's probably been my latest, I guess, gut check.
This barren land could bear good fruit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yeah. Powerful.
Yeah. Brea, thank you for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been amazing.
Like, comment, and subscribe if you care to see me ramble any more than you already did today. And for more free content and guides, you can check out my clinic website at www.hivenaturalhealth, all one word, /free-resources. And until next time, my friends, trust in your gut.